So that when this book was first published, it was 1995. It was right a year after the Rebbe, which I'll talk about, passed away. Bavitcher Rebbe was essentially the leader of this community, but really, I would call it global. And so I was in Miami, South Beach, at what they call in November, they have the Miami International Book Fair. So they bring new authors, and I did a talk. It was in Colony Theater, if you've ever been there, Lincoln Road. It was a very beautiful place, beautiful theater, great acoustics. Not as good as here, but at the end of my talk, a woman gets up and asks the question. She says, "Before I read your book, I'd like to know what your opinion is about denominations that are not like your own." Meaning, you look like an Orthodox Jew. That's what she said. And I happen to be a conservative Jew. There are people here that are not Jewish. I want to know what your opinion is about us, because I hear that you don't necessarily consider us equals, to put it mildly. And I don't want to buy the book of a bigot. That's what she said. So we can call this like a little like a heckler, almost. But heckling can always sometimes be very good for this business because it gets people interested. And I remember the whole theater fell very silent. I mean, they were quiet, but this was really quiet. Like you could hear a pin drop because they wanted to see how I'm going to respond. And so I want to know whether you recognize a conservative, reform, you recognize other religions, other denominations, other schools of thought. So I decided to take advantage of the moment, and I said, "You're 100% right. I don't recognize them. They're not legitimate in my mind." And I just, as difficult as it was, I felt quiet and wanted to see what would happen. And the place started hemming and hawing. You could sense a lot of tension in the room. Because I just basically said I'm a bigot, essentially. And then when I felt it was at a boiling point, I said, "Okay, 1 minute. Before you get violent and before you stone me or throw eggs or whatever, I'd like to also share with you that I don't recognize Orthodox Judaism either. I don't think any of these labels are legitimate. If you asked, I'll reverse the question to you. I said, tell me, was Moses Orthodox, conservative, or reform? And how about God? Is God Jewish, Muslim, Christian, or non-denominational? We know God wasn't circumcised. And I said, so the fact is, anyone that has even a rudimentary understanding of spirituality knows you can't fit human beings into boxes. It's not like labels are for clothing, they say, not for souls. We're all children of God, and God is not defined by square, rectangle, brown, black, yellow, white, Hispanic, or for that matter, Jewish, not Jewish. If you believe in God, God created all of existence, every blade of grass, every cell, and every human being, and as such, we are all sacred. That was my central response. I remember, just to tell you the end of the story, so she said, that's very cute answer. I think she said cute, a very original, creative answer. That's what she said, very creative answer. But how do I know that's true? So at this point, I feigned indignation. And I said, listen, lady, life is filled with risks, and you're just going to have to get the book. And if you don't like it, maybe they'll return you, maybe money back, I don't know. But the point is that she actually gave me a great story that I've repeated many times. And I think it's a very good way to, convey the spirit of, first of all, where you are actually right now, here in Crown Heights, in this library, and sharing some of just briefly the philosophy. And that is ultimately that there's one God that created everything, and all of us are, the way I like to put it, indispensable musical notes in a large cosmic symphony. And we need each other, and each one of us is needed. So like in an orchestra, someone's not going to play their violin or piano or trumpet or whatever it may be, the music won't be complete. So I want to just say as an opening that it's an honor to play music together here. Each of you, though we're meeting for the first time, but I guess as souls we probably met before, and I'm sure we'll meet beyond. We're not just physical bodies. And in that sense, each of you is a indispensable part of God's plan. That's the essence of what I grew up with. I actually was born here in Crown Heights in 1956. If you want to take a second, you can calculate my age. People like to do that, you know. I think I'm the oldest guy in the room.
No.
Oh, okay. I don't feel old, but it's a compliment. You look so young and vibrant. And I was born here. My parents are both Russian-born, who came to the United States after World War II, barely, escaping first the Soviet Union and then Nazi Europe. So I'm the oldest of 5 children. I'll just give you a little background. My father was a journalist, so I grew up in an interesting home. My father was a global citizen, but at the same time I grew up here in a very traditional Jewish community called the Chabad movement. I don't even like to call it a movement because, as I'll share, I think, as I just said, it's much more universal than a movement. And it really, so I grew up with my great mentor and teacher, was the Rabbi, as he's known lovingly, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who assumed leadership in 1950 after his father-in-law passed away, who they also came, mind you, from Russia earlier. And he assumed leadership in 1950, and he built the movement into a global movement. He passed away in 1994, as I mentioned, but his influence and his teachings and his legacy lives on through each of us. That's a sign of a real teacher. It's not just their physical presence, it's what they represent, their values, and most importantly, that they inspire others to be leaders. I'm not sure how they refer to you, Rabbi Friedman or Mayor. So Mayor is a young man. He was born, what year were you born?
98.
98. He never... Yeah. Okay. There you go. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're still from the previous century. If you want to put it that. Previous millennium. 20, yeah, the second. And he wouldn't be doing this. I wouldn't be doing we weren't inspired by this great man who was a truly selfless leader that taught us this message, that we are all critical pieces of a larger story. And frankly, not just our generation. We come from generations past. So we're sometimes compared to like midgets that stand on the shoulders of giants. So we have their strengths as well as our unique contribution. And most importantly, the message is that each of us has responsibility. We're not just here to exist and survive, but to produce, to be givers, not just takers. So in that sense, I feel that just our sitting here together is really meant to lead us to that, how each of us can be inspired to give more and recognize our own uniqueness. You know, we live in a world where many of us become conformists. We conform to other people's values, other people's opinions. Sometimes it's parents, sometimes it's our education, sometimes it's even our religion that can be demanding. And it's critical to own it, to make it personal and yours. A lot of that times you don't hear that message. You know, especially in religious circles, often follow the rules, don't break, don't rebel. But the truth is, rebellion can be a good thing if it's harnessed and used in the right direction. Because you don't want to create herd mentality, you want to create individuality that's aligned, because God did create us as different people. None of us have the same faces, we don't have the same opinions. So diversity is not bad. Diversity is a blessing. You want diversity not to turn to divisiveness. You want diversity to be coordinated. We'll call it harmony within diversity. So I feel honored in that sense as we're sitting with you in that context. So let me share this movement called Chabad. Again, I don't like the word movement because it suggests certain, what's the word, parochialness. I don't mean it that way. So it has 2 names, Chabad and Lubavitch. So this is the central headquarters right here. Here's where the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, came in 1940, middle of World War II, and ultimately settled here. And then his son-in-law, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and they built a community. But interesting, as opposed to almost any other community, they sent everybody away as much as they could, those that were willing to go. Meaning, the goal was not to build another ghetto or another parochial group, but really that everybody go out there and be ambassadors of light and ambassadors of love, ambassadors of virtue, exactly like the Bible tells us about Abraham. What did he do? He left his homeland. The Bible tells us, leave your homeland, the birthplace, the home of your parents, and go to the land that I will show you. I will show you who you are. Because as long as we're under the influence of our homeland, our culture, our race, our society, our parents, we're still an extension of them. When do you grow? Is when you move out of home. Now, it's important for every child has to live at home. We'd have to have our nest. We're nurtured there. But at some point, I'm sure some of you are parents. Yeah. So as much as you love to have your children with you all the time, but at some point, the bird has to fly. And you want them to not stay in the nest. You want them to spread their wings. And it's the greatest gift to see your children blossom and thrive. And you only do that when you suddenly get out of your comfort zone. So that's exactly what the Rebbe did. He said, get out of your comfort zone, go to everywhere, from one corner of the earth to the other. And he empowered people. And you can do it. As much as you may be hesitant or not secure, there was an empowerment thing. And that was the essential message. So the name of we'll call the movement Chabad and Lubavitch, two names. So you may be familiar. I'll just share with you what the meaning behind them both are, because it's quite profound. Chabad is an acronym in Hebrew for the words Chachma, Bina, Das, which means the three cognitive faculties: conceiving of an idea, developing an idea, and concluding it. We all have those three faculties. Lubavitch is actually is a word in Russian. Luba means love. So vich is like a suffix, like you're saying Yorktown. So Lubavitch is the city of love, essentially, which of course is emotions. So very much the teachings of this, where I grew up and Meir grew up with, is that a healthy human being needs to have a healthy cognitive, intellectual approach to life. You reflect, you understand things, but it's complemented by also having a healthy heart. Being able to have relationships, what we call not just intellectual intelligence, but emotional intelligence. Sometimes women like to point out that men don't have so much of that. I'm sure this group is an exception. Like that joke where they say, a woman asks her husband, she says, what do you think about women's intuition? And he says, stop with that baloney. She says, how did I know you're going to say that? So, but the truth is, emotional intelligence is the domain of all of us. And there are many people who are very book smart, and they got the brains, they can play chess well, they can play mind games, but they're afraid of engaging on a heart level. So the second name, Lubavitch, emphasizes that it's not just about the mind, it's also about the heart. And we can even say, as an expression, actually I have it in the back of the book, words from the heart enter the heart. This was a very favorite expression. It goes back from the sages a few centuries, but the Rabbi Schneerson Rebbe, the Rebbe would quote it often. It's a tremendous line. I once heard it said in different terms, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I'm not sure who coined that. I think Benjamin Franklin maybe I saw recently. But the point is that the heart, and we all know someone can talk to you all kinds of intellectual ideas, they may be brilliant, but if you don't feel they care, you don't feel there's empathy, it's not going to resonate. So,
words from the heart go...
enter the heart. You may have to get the book. Words that come from the heart enter the heart, yeah. So that in many ways is we'll call the formula that we abide by, that the ethos, the mandate that we follow. And if you think about it, it's a very comprehensive, because it's not just emotional, it's also guided by solid underpinnings of intellectual integrity and so on. And I would say in many ways, it's really the secret of our existence. Many people wonder, we're cousins, but we wonder why the Jewish people, how did they make it through? I hear people who visit the Dalai Lama, and when he hears that they're Jewish, he always says to them, why are you coming to me? You guys are here before I was here. I learned from you. And then he says to them, but I want to know the secret. How did you make it for so many years without a country? Remember, he's in exile from Tibet. So he's wondering, how could you, without a country, without a home, without an empire, without money, being, frankly, most of our history being discriminated against, much worse, even expelled, executed, Holocaust. So people wonder. And the answer is, really, it comes down to because all the great empires, the Roman Empire, the Spanish Empire, the Babylonian, the Persian, the Egyptian, they were all great empires. But they all grew by their egos and they died by their egos. That's how it is. You win by the sword and then you lose by the sword. And then you turn on each other. And it's the only ones that last are the ones that do not see themselves as the center of existence. They see there's a God that's higher than we are. In Hebrew, we have a word for it called, in Hasidic terminology, it's called bittul. Maybe you haven't. If you haven't heard this word, it's a very powerful word. It's spelled B-I-T-T-U-L. And I'll tell you what it means. It means it's a combination of modesty, humility, but most of all, suspending yourself in face of a cause that's greater than yourself. It's essentially a life of service. That cannot be destroyed. You can destroy an ego. You can destroy a person. Anything that's built on materialism, materialism begins and ends. It's all mortal, and it's all subject to aging, erosion, and then it perishes, it dies. Spirituality doesn't die. The soul never dies. Even after we finish this leg of our journey, the soul continues its journey just as it was here before it came to our bodies. And when you embrace that principle and you hold on to it, that's the secret to eternity. Everybody's looking for the fountain of youth. That's the secret. Connection to something that's greater than yourself. In many ways, that idea that we align our minds and our hearts and our emotions toward loving others and caring for others, where it's more important, not your needs, not what you're taking, but what you're giving, that is ultimately the secret of eternity. And I could say I'm very proud to be part of this. Again, I don't like any exclusionary terms. I'm not sure what word to use, but the part of this way of thinking. And I was deeply touched as a young man by the Rabbi Schneerson, the Rebbe. It ignited in me my spirit to be a writer, a communicator, and a speaker, and teacher, which is what I do till this day. I wrote this book. I've written other books. I have an organization called Meaningful Life Center. The name tells you it all. It's about how to live a life of meaning. Definitely encourage you to check it out, meaningfullife.com. And I think, above all, what I would like to suggest, it's always good to talk about practical things. You're here in this hub, in this space. I try to give a little taste of what the spirit of this community is about. You gotten the Torah ready? You're in the middle of the Torah. I don't know. Huh? Right. So you've seen some of the landmarks, I guess, right? Some of the shtetl landmarks, like the gefilte fish. I don't know. I don't. Okay. The bakery. I don't know but you get the picture. Okay. Right. You had some kosher food? Okay. You guys have good kosher food? Very good. Yeah, great. But there's a whole spirit in this community, and literally there are right now, as we speak, thousands of people that grew up here and in similar communities that are all over the world. So wherever you travel, you'll probably find some Chabad guy or woman, couple, who built a community. And its objective is straightforward. You are all part of it. We're all part of it. We're God's messengers in this world to bring light, to bring love. We live in a very polarized environment, a world where people can't even communicate with each other. You don't agree with me, It gets personalized, character assassination. I don't think I have to elaborate. You can't even agree to disagree. So I'd like to believe that we're sitting here as brothers and sisters, and we can do that. I'm not saying we disagree, but even if we did, it can be done in the spirit of love. I have siblings. I don't agree with everything, but we never don't love each other. And on the contrary, we learn from each other. I always like to hear people who don't agree with me. I don't want to hear people who agree with me because I don't learn from that. I know that already. I want to learn something new. So I find this to be a beautiful, call it mosaic of different cultures and different races and different religions. But at the end of the day, it's one God. As I said earlier, each of us playing our musical note. My father, as a journalist, would say to me, there are three types of people. People who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people who ask what happened. So we're here to make things happen. So I would suggest, I've recently been toying with an idea called a spiritual spa. Just like a body needs food, drink, nourishment, exercise, hygiene, sleep, rest. So soul also needs nourishment. It also needs nutrients and vitamins and exercises, except they're spiritual ones. So I thought of this spiritual spa. Spa is an acronym for study, prayer, action. SPA. Essentially, in psychological terms, cognitive, emotional, and behavioral conditioning. And indeed, in one of the statements from the Ethics of the Fathers, our sages tell us, and based on biblical verses, that the world stands on three pillars. The cognitive pillar, study. Second is the emotional pillar called prayer, which is service of the heart. And the third is actions, behavior, kindness, acts of kindness, charity, virtue, visiting the sick, helping the needy, and everything that includes. So if we take upon ourselves every day to do something in addition to everything you've done already, and you're doing, in the realm of study, reading something spiritual or reading something in the Bible or Bible-based, get your mind out of the let's call it all the inundation from the media and the internet and our mobiles and all that. It just takes your mind into a place that's more godly, that's more heavenly. That already is cleansing. We all know that. It's not about the today and tomorrow. It's about bigger, transcendent values. And secondly, every day a prayer. which I'm sure you pray already, but just think of it as like a resolution we all take upon ourselves, which is speaking from your heart, not just putting your mind thinking about God, but also speaking to God. Share your feelings. We're entitled, and we're actually asked. God loves us. Says, tell me what you need. Whether it's health, whether it's in family, whether it's your own internal inner peace, we all have our struggles. And finally, action, something behavioral, additional charity. Charity could be monetary, it could be giving someone advice or sharing a kind word. And today it's so easy, especially technology. You press a button, you can reach who knows how many people. Share a nice thought. Most important is being proactive, not waiting, not watching the news or asking what happened, but actually making things happen. I feel that would be the spirit of everything I've learned, everything I think this community represents. And above all, you all go back to your corner of the world. Each of you have your sphere of influence. And always remember, you have something you can accomplish that only you can accomplish. Nobody but you. Not me, not anyone. Not even teachers or rabbis or clergy or anyone that you see as your mentor. Because why are you here? You have something that only you can accomplish. It's an unbelievable statement, because it really, besides being empowering, it just turns us into influencers instead of being influenced. Imagine we told our children every morning and every evening, besides I love you, God sent you as a gift to me. I'm the gardener, but you're the flower, and I'm here to help you blossom. I'm here to help you grow. I'm here to help you shine. Sing your unique song. I remember my son was today a father of his own. He lives in Pittsburgh, actually. Going to see him this weekend. was tomorrow. So when he came home one day from school, he was all excited. He was a little kid, 6, 7 years old. And I said, so why are you so excited? His name is Mendel, Menachem Mendel. So it's a name you're going to hear it's around. It's the name of the Rebbe. A lot of kids here are named by that. And I said, so why are you so excited, Mendel? So he said to me, I heard something really nice today. I said, what was it? He said, you were born an original. Don't become a copy. And as when your child gets excited, you get excited. And I remember it till this day. Anyway, recently, I said to my son, who's now, as I say, he's already 38-year-old father of his own 3 children. I said, so Mendel, remember that day? He didn't even remember. Kids, I remember. I guess he'll remember when his son reminds him, or his child. I said, remember that? Original copy. Okay, then I said, so what happened with you? I wanted to always check in with you after all these years. What happened? You were an original or a copy? So he happens to be, no pun intended, a copywriter. That's what he does. He writes copy, and he is a creative director, so he writes a lot of, he's very good with words, he's a wordsmith. So he says to me, I'm an original copy. Whatever that means. I never got to the bottom of it. The point is, it's a tremendous statement. And I'll say, Michelangelo, the great sculptor, he was once asked, how do you sculpt those beautiful angels in the marble? And he answered the following. Listen to this. He said, I see the angels trapped in the marble, and I carved and set them free. I think it's a tremendous concept because it means you don't need to find beauty somewhere else. It's right there inside you, inside every person you'll ever meet, every human being on this earth. Sometimes it's trapped. The angel, the flower, the music. It could be in marble, it could be in concrete, it can be in other substances. And what we need to do is just wipe away the excess. We have to carve. We don't need to create. You have to find and let people help them discover who they really are. That piece of God that they are, that part of the divine. And when they do that, then you set them free. They spread their wings. I think it's a beautiful way of looking at people in general, especially anyone you ever meet. Even if sometimes someone looks obnoxious or something that's a little distasteful, I'm not suggesting we ignore that, but that's not who they are. That's the concrete, the marble. We have to figure out how to find that angel within. And I really would like to believe that our encounter here will be eternal. Wherever you go, hopefully you can carry this message and the messages and the spirit that you pick up here. We can learn from you, I'll learn from you, and hopefully you learn from me, we'll learn from each other. Cross-pollinate and create music, magic. It's been a great honor to share a few words. And I open up the table here, and may we all merit to come to that day, which is imminent, and each of us will play our music, and we'll have that grand cosmic symphony in a world of peace, in a world of redemption, where the entire world, all of 8 billion of us, each will recognize what our role is in God's greater plan. Thank you so much.
Do we have a minute for questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I've got one right back.
Huh?
So you said many things about eternity, and I love almost everything you just said. What does the Jewish community, the Hasidic community, believe about what happens to us when we die?
Very straightforward. I actually have a chapter on it, death and grieving. The soul, as I said, doesn't die.
Bible?
No. That's up to you. But the answer is very straightforward. A soul doesn't die just like it's not born. A soul is on a continuous journey. And it occupies a body for, let's say, whatever the amount of years we're given. And the soul continues on its journey on a spiritual level. We're like what they say, we're not physical beings on a spiritual journey, we're spiritual beings on a physical journey. So different legs of the journey. Think of it that way. I just use a humorous analogy that I often use. It's like, where does the soul go to? So think of a refrigerator having an imaginary conversation with electricity. And the refrigerator asks the electricity, where do you go to after they pull the plug? And the electricity says to the refrigerator, what do you mean? What kind of chutzpah, what kind of nerve was asking that question? What do you mean where I go to? I was here long before you were ever invented. They invented this box called a refrigerator, and now you think you're the center of the universe. You ask me where I go back to my place that wasn't confined in time and space as you know it. So, I'm not saying, we like to think in terms, this is where it's at, and what else is out there? Maybe what's out there is really where it's at, and we're just one little piece. And I think Abraham in the Bible and the great men and women, they came to discover that we are a piece of the whole. We're not the whole. There's a greater whole, and we're a part of it. We are blessed to be a part of it. So in a way, understanding that expands our consciousness to realize that the soul does have that viewpoint. I always like to think of the soul of a bird that comes onto the shoulder of a person on a boat. And the person is like the body, bird's like the soul. The bird has a bird's eye view and sees a bigger picture. So we have these two forces inside of us. Our body is far more grounded, the gravitational pull, and the soul is like a flame that's licking the air, transcendent. And that continues to live on. So every good deed you do lives on forever and ever. It's only the material world that goes through changes, but the soul is forever and ever.
Very good.
I have a question. I know you didn't want to describe it as a movement, but with Chabad, among the Jewish community, the Orthodox community, are there those that you have, what you're doing by allowing us to come, the others who are opposed to that or have any kind of, you have to talk to them about this?
Look, the nature of the beast is, in cultures, you'll find those that are more insulated and closed and those that are much more open. There are Jewish communities that are, I would say, stay to their own. They're a little more insulated. You meet them individually, wonderful people. They do business, they know the ways of the world. But it's their culture, and maybe they may be threatened by things that are different. I'm not going to judge. We were taught in the spirit of Abraham that you need to go bring God out to the world. It's not just what we call, it's not just being a righteous person in a fur coat that keeps yourself warm, but it's lighting a fireplace and make everybody warm. So there are different approaches, but overall, I would respect, some communities, you come in with a camera and their synagogue, they may not be so happy. But I'm sure this is not just in the Jewish world, there's many communities that have more. Here you're not going to find that. This is a very open community for the reasons I mentioned. So I'm not trying to in any way diminish that attitude, but it's a little more insulatory and more. Now, I will say that just in general, I think a healthy balance in life is also your home is not the street. Everybody has some insulation. Like you may have an open home, but that doesn't mean everybody's moving in. I hope. There are boundaries. So we all need boundaries, but there's also a matter of being able to be comfortable. As I teach people, I coach people, and I always say to them, you go to a party, who do you gravitate to? The people you know or the people you don't know? Most people go to the people they know because it's more comfortable. I tend to go to the people I don't know because the people I know I can meet elsewhere. I meet them back at home. Might as well learn from the experience. But you need to be secure and confident and feel comfortable.
Thank you.
I'm saying, so you may meet Jews that look like me that may not be so comfortable sitting, not necessarily with you particularly, but the people that are not of their own culture or their own people they're familiar with. But that's a normal thing, and we try to expand our horizons, try to teach people to embrace the larger population.
Yes.
Yeah.
In reading some literature on Second Temple period Judaism and taking a few lectures, I noticed that two groups so often got mentioned that were prophets and sages. I guess my question is twofold. Are there sages still today, and would Menachem Schneerson be considered a mix of prophet and sage in your view?
A very good question. There's a technical definition of a prophet or a sage, and there's a more, I would say, broader definition. Meaning that the Rebbe is a sage of the highest order, is no question. A great, tremendous scholar, and by all accounts, So in that sense, definitely the spirit of a sage. But then there's the technical, like for example, you talk about the sages, the Talmudic sages. So they're known in that period, the Talmudic. So obviously, someone didn't live in that time, no matter how great of a sage they are. So in the broader sense, in the more narrow sense, like you interpret, there's Tanoim and Amoraim. These are Hebrew names for different generational sages. So that's more time-bound. As far as prophet goes, it does state that prophecy ended at a certain point, but that doesn't mean you can't have people who are blessed. Remember, at the end of the day, a prophet is essentially a man of God or woman of God, that God is allowing them to have a certain vision. It's a visionary, really. So in that sense, you can say any true leader, any true godly leader will have elements of prophecy. I don't know if we would define the person as a prophet, but you can definitely say that the Rebbe had definitely visionary elements. I mean, I could point out, and sometimes even miraculously ones, how did he know certain things? But it's not something that you'll find, it was not something that this was, people here are not going to go around and say, the Rebbe miraculously prophesied something. That's not the basis of his authority. His authority is based on him being a humble servant of God, a man of goodness and virtue. But that he definitely had vision, he foresaw things, but he was also didn't tout it. It wasn't like he'd get up on the mountain and start saying, okay, I see this coming or that coming, It was more in passing. Certain things, you see how he led. Like he anticipated, for example, the rebellion of the youth in the 60s, anticipated the rise of feminism, even technology. He spoke about technology before it actually really became such a force in our lives. So in that sense, you could say, I like to use the word visionary, I think is the best word to use. Yeah.
Thank you.
He discerned the times.
Yeah. So, well, in a way you could say it's like a person, smart people have an element of, they take the pulse. They know, they see trends, and they can anticipate certain things. I mean, you could manifest it even in scientific terms, or you can speak in more biblical terms. When you're a wise person, after World War II, there was so much upheaval. What would happen next? The Rebbe, no question, had a good sense of the apathy that would come with prosperity, for example, and he prepared the ground. I mean, he was a leader. A leader, really, it's not about the prophecy, it's about preparing people for the future, of understanding the ups and downs of a society. We're going through different cycles in life. How do you navigate? That's maybe the best way to put it. How to navigate the vicissitudes, the twists and turns and ups and downs. Look, right now we're in a very serious period of transition and upheaval in many ways, disruption, whether it's the internet and Amazon disrupting the whole retail world, or the disruptions of COVID that disrupted some, or the war in Ukraine, or President Trump disrupted the political system. Again, whether you're for or against, it's not the point. We're definitely in a place of change. There's clearly changes happening. So this is the times where I say this, that even though the Rebbe is not here now 28 years, his vision and his teachings are extremely relevant today. And I definitely encourage you to read my book, but not just anything. You'll see. You'll find it quite uncanny how he understood where we're headed, dealing with the challenges of life. And as such, that's what a good leader is really about. Empower you to deal with, to know how to navigate. Yeah.
Do you foresee more challenges coming our way?
Some challenges are not in our control. Some are. We sometimes we can be our own worst enemy. We sometimes bring on challenges we don't need, When people, for example, don't respond properly to a challenge, sometimes the challenge becomes worse. It's like when you don't deal with an infection, it can turn into a monster. I find most challenges today some of them are man-made, that we don't need. It's not, the COVID you can say was not, you can't blame one person for that. Whatever, however you view it, coming from China, whatever it is. I don't think most of us can be said, this person's to blame, that one's to blame. But how we navigate it is absolutely in our control. So I'm sure there are going to be, whenever you're in a transitionary stage, there will be challenges. The challenge that it's not, we all remember the year before March 2020, before COVID. Did anyone anticipate what was coming? No. So I'm sure there are going to be, I'm not saying anything negative necessarily, But there are going to be, that's what transitions are about. Always remember, however, that a transition is simply the discomfort of moving from one paradigm to another. You know, think of it like the egg cracking so the chick can come out. It's always the beginning of a new birthing. You'll see anyone who's ever dealt with upheavals always understood that it's stages. Don't get stuck in the moment. Realize, okay, this is a setback, but this can catapult us to a greater growth. It's a time for assessment, introspection. That's how I see it. So even things that sometimes can be very negative, I mean, even grief, even loss. Anyone experienced loss or death? You see, if you ultimately understand, especially in context of God, you realize there's growth that comes from it. The expression in the book of Psalms puts it this way: those that will sow in tears will reap in joy. So there's a time for tears, there's a time for joy. And I think really growing through pain is a very critical point, because every one of us is going to experience something negative. So I think it's not so much knowing what will be tomorrow, but knowing that whatever comes your way, you can navigate. That's, I think, the most important thing to know, that you could swim through any storm. You have to learn how to swim. Yeah, sure.
One of the focuses of our organization, the Friends of Israel, is to speak out against anti-Semitism. Relatively speaking, it would seem to me that the Jewish community has had a wonderful time of acceptance here in the United States over the years. There's been exceptions, but generally speaking. But there was, like in Spain, at one time, a golden age.
Right.
And that quickly changed. Do you see trends in the days in which we live of a growing anti-Semitism?
That's a great question. You will have schools of thought that see it that way. I don't see it that way. I do think there are blips in the screen, meaning we know there have been attacks on, let's say, synagogue in Pittsburgh, Tree of Life, or in Poway or other places, and you see anti-Semitic attacks, so you can't ignore that. And probably statistically, there's probably been a rise in the last few years. But I've been trained to see it as not the trend that's happening, because remember, we also have a tremendous amount of friends. Look at yourselves. You have probably 100 million Americans that consider themselves in the Christian right, that are very pro-Israel and pro-Jewish and pro... so that's unprecedented as well. That never happened in history. I see that far more as the trend than the other way around. But you do have, let's be honest, I mean, there are... we're not yet in a world of total peace and no crime, and there's plenty of biases, and we have work to do. So I'm not denying that. I just don't see it as a trend that we... Now listen, this still, you have to lock your doors and be prudent and practical and make sure you provide the security needed in synagogues or other houses of worship. But I don't think we should panic. I do think there's a fundamental difference. I know some may disagree, but I really believe this. The United States is an unprecedented country. You know, the end of the day, Spain, it was the benevolence of the king and the queen. They could have any time changed. There was nothing in the Constitution of Spain that said that all men are created equal. We have certain fundamentals here. Now, can that change? Yeah. Can there become a majority in Congress that will suddenly create an amendment that abolishes the Declaration of Independence? I don't think it's so likely to happen. I don't think people like yourselves would let that happen. I think the majority of this country would never let that happen, because it's not just the Jews. It's any minority, and it's anyone that is not you agree with. I mean, remember, Catholics were persecuted by Protestants, and vice versa. So I think those foundations are very divine, in my view, and that is pretty much solid in place. You could prosecute someone for a racial crime. You could not do that in Spain and being that we do believe in God and we believe in providence, I think the trends show that the world has moved to a far more benevolent place, And Jews have always either suffered when there was discrimination more than anyone, they've also benefited most, because when there wasn't. And that's why there is a thriving Jewish population and community, besides Israel, of course. So I think there are unprecedented developments that... But I understand, there are people, I mean, listen, I remember when Joe Lieberman was running for office as the vice presidential candidate of Gore, there were a lot of Jews, they said, stay low if the Jews start showing their face too much, anti-Semitism. I didn't agree with that. And I also take my cue from my teacher and Rabbi. We are moving toward a better world. We're not going backwards. We really believe that. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't dips. That's how it works. Life is not just like that. Even the stock market is not just like that. But overall, it's, I think, a very good trajectory. And I'm very encouraged when we sit here. I remember being in Israel before COVID. I was by the wall, the Western Wall. Any of you been to Israel? So I met a group from Oklahoma, Christians, and it was so touching. I says, what are you doing here? What do you mean? It was the promised land, chosen people. We're here to stand. We're going now to the IDF. Going to stand in solidarity with them. I was like, and I didn't even ask. I just said, this is divine. You never heard this 1,000 years ago. It would be unthinkable. Even if they weren't against, but they weren't such supporters. So I find that to be a tremendous... I see that as messianic, frankly. I think the fact that there's that type of solidarity and support... I wish all Jews supported Israel and the Jewish people as much as you do. To be very honest, I'm not saying it critically. It's just a fact that that's how it is.
Related to that, how would you encourage a group of evangelical Christians to go forward?
To go forward?
Yeah, just in life in general.
I think you're doing quite well. It could always be better, I'm sure. I don't know the details of your mandate and everything that you're involved in, but I would just encourage as much as possible. Look, our meeting today, share it with others. People need to know that this is happening, that there is real exchange. It's not like two worlds. I don't see any issue why there should be even bias or prejudice. I mean, a lot of anti-Semitism today, let's be honest, is from ignorance. Most people who are anti-Semitic haven't even met a Jew. It's not like, it comes from old culture. It comes from biases, things that are just built in. So I think the more we speak, the more you get to see each other, and you see we're all humans, and we're all under one God, and we have similar missions. I think that's what your role is. You have friends. I am sure you have relatives. I don't think it's a battle against anti-Semitism. I believe we should fight for, not against, to bring in what are the common values. What does Judaism teach? What does the Torah teach? What does the Bible teach? To love another. This is the foundations. I would love someone to show me in the Christian literature values that are different than Jewish literature. Same values. We all want to bring up healthy children, want to bring love into this world. There are differences in rituals, in certain beliefs perhaps, but the actual fundamental human values, is there anything that you can point out that we disagree with on a fundamental level? Everybody deserves to bring up a healthy family. Children should have opportunity. We should care for each other. Charity, kindness, virtue. So when you think about it, it's almost like ludicrous that the differences, even if they are differences, technical differences, there's no real fundamental value differences. I don't see that at all. I think the biggest issues are insecurity. For me to be right, I need to eliminate you. That has been always a unfortunate. But I think people like yourselves and us and all of us need to keep pressing that. The best defense is offense. Share truths. I will just share with you. There was a guy that I know, not Jewish. He didn't consider himself religious. I think he grew up in a Catholic home, but he left that. And he considered himself agnostic or something like that. He got a copy of my book, Toward a Meaningful Life, which he really fell in love with. He wrote to me. And he said, I come from a very Christian family, and they're very anti-Semitic. I dropped all that because I dropped everything that they believe. And he asked me, is anything... So I said to him, why don't you give them my book to read? He says they won't want to open it until they see the title. I said, so tear off the cover. Anyway, I don't know what he did, but he called me, he wrote to me, then I met him later in New York. And he said to me, I showed it first to my mother, because I thought they fell in love with the book. Their attitudes changed completely, because they never read anything from Jewish sources. It was all based on something they heard, that Jews have horns or something, or they drink Christian blood. It was complete fabricate, not even reality. So I think it comes down to, we believe there's a statement in the Bible, in the book of Ecclesiastes, from King Solomon. He says, I see the advantage of wisdom over folly like the advantage of light over darkness. Just like light automatically dispels darkness, wisdom automatically dispels ignorance. Ignorance, in other words, is the absence of wisdom. It doesn't have any power of its own. If you don't know something and then someone informs you, okay, now I know. It's not like fire and water that battle with each other. So I see it as we have to be ambassadors of light, of information, sharing. Someone says to you something anti-Semitic, I would say, are you familiar with anything that a Jew says or Jews teach? Before you say something, look at it. And I'm not defending them, just read something. I'll give you an article to read. Tell me after that, is there a problem with that article? Now, will it always work? We know prejudice can be deep-rooted. But I think you all can do much about this. Don't underestimate what one person can do. Because everybody has their sphere of influence. Wherever you go, wherever you are. Where do most of you live? Are you in different places? All over?
All over.
Okay, so good. So we have a representation here of... it's almost like Chabad, everywhere.
I was just wondering, do you think that the media, internet, things like that today lead to racism, anti-Semitism? And the reason, I'll give you the background why I asked that, I have Jewish friends that I was talking to about what's happening in Palestine and Israel, and they they hit me with a statement, and I would say I would believe they were secular in that sense, but they made the statement that the Jewish people have brought the attacks on themselves. And coming from Jewish people, that really kind of hit me hard. Is that coming from me? And how do we counteract that?
Look, the Nazis said that. They said the Jews brought it on themselves. It's the common scapegoat approach where you blame the victim. It's like a woman is raped, God forbid, and someone says she brought it on herself. It's worse than the crime. I don't even know what to say. Even if a human being makes a mistake, does that justify hurting that person? Let's say they made a mistake and they walked out at night defenseless and somebody attacked them. You don't say they brought it on themselves. You say, okay, they should have, but I just think it's part of the discrimination. What should I tell you? That's why we need to have intelligent people like ourselves that have integrity and not looking to blame people. We're not looking for scapegoats. We're being honest, And if we did something wrong, we correct it. I've met people who consider themselves anti-Semitic, and they've apologized to me, not personally to me, but on behalf. Said, I had attitudes, and then I discovered they were baseless. Now, this is not just true with anti-Semitic. It could be with other forms of racism, and that's what's called growing up. You hear these beautiful stories of people who were racial attacks, and then they went into rehab, they went into prison, and they became advocates for common understanding and so on. Those are beautiful stories when you hear that. But there's a lot of ignorance. And remember, yes, the media can be a big problem because the media just repeats and can perpetuate a myth and just becomes viral and based on nothing. So that's another challenge we have. How do we immunize ourselves from this mass almost brainwashing that comes from the media? That's why I think, from my point of view, the more you read the Bible, the more you read God's words, the more protected you are from all this nonsense. Just watch television all day and movies. You'll see it will completely corrupt your mind. I'm not even talking about things are inappropriate. Just the nonsense. It's a lot of nonsense, you know.
I was just going to piggyback on what you said earlier of the things that we have in common and the values that we have in common. And what you just said, I think there are Christians in name only that are completely ignorant about the Bible. And then there are those who, like us, hold the Bible in high regard as the Word of God. And we read it, we spend time in it, and I think has to be the foundation in order to have those type of values. You start with God's wisdom so that you then can interpret the world. Even in the New Testament, it says the greatest commandment is taken from the Torah. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
So that's the foundation. And without that foundation,
Absolutely.
it's like building a house on sand.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, the founding fathers of this country definitely knew their Bible. You could see a lot of their principles as taken straight from it. I remember reading a book by Michael Novak, I think he's a Christian scholar, called On Two Wings, where he actually demonstrates in the writings of the founding fathers how they based it on biblical and Torah principles. Whether it was providence or all people are created equal, men are created equal, and things like that, the rights. There's no question. They didn't necessarily turn it into a religious doctrine, separation of church and state, but the principles. That's one of the reasons that I remember the Rebbe, when he spoke about it in 1980, gave a talk about it. He said it was divinely inspired because they institutionalized it. It was no longer just church doctrine. It was an institutionalized government which stands still today. There's no question that the success of this country was based on religious freedom and the rights, the eternal, inalienable rights of human beings. Had this country not had that guarantee, there's no way you would have the melting pot that caused such success.
Rights that
No
come
way.
from the Creator.
Right, exactly, from the Creator, created from the Creator. That's not even, it's almost biblical what they write. I think it's biblical. They say the Creator gave us these rights and no one can take them from us. Simple as that. Well, it was all great really meeting you guys. Any other questions?
I've got one more.
Sure.
I'd like to take a group picture with the rabbi also.
Yeah,
I've got one,
sure.
just one more question. If we
Go ahead. And remember, you can still ask. If you just write to me, you can take my email, simon@meaningfullife.com. If you have any questions, follow up. If you like, I send out a weekly email. If you like to get it, just send me simon@meaningfullife.com or the website, meaningfullife.com. So if something you missed, you can always follow up with me. You can also, Mayor knows how to reach me. But go ahead.
So, Rabbi, first of all, love what you're saying and that you're spending time with us.
Sure.
Number two, you talk about diversity of thought and that when people agree with you, that's okay. But like a party, you want to go where and visit some other folks. There's a gentleman that I've read. His name is Arnold Fruchtenbaum. I don't know if you know that name. But he was a rabbi, became a Christian, so to speak. He tells a story about how he was essentially disowned by his dad, that kind of thing.
Okay.
In the Hasidic community, how do you balance that, if a member of the Hasidic community goes on and believes something else or becomes an atheist or whatever it might be? Do they kind of get shunned or is that part of the diversity of thought and it's welcome?
It's a very good question. I could just answer personally. I mean, I'm sure some will shun a person like that, either because they're threatened or they feel he can corrupt their community. I mean, I never thought of it this way, but if my son came to me and said he became a Christian priest or
Atheist or whatever.
I'd still love him. I'd probably argue with him. I would not in any way love him less. I would wonder, like, what drove him there. But that's me. But listen, let's be honest. We're human beings. There are people that's difficult for a parent or a relative sometimes to see something. I mean, I deal with this on the sexual level.
So that
a
might
child
happen.
that, say, announces they're gay or transgender. So for many parents, it's just impossible for them to deal with.
So that might vary from individual to individual, but culturally, as a Hasidic culture,
Well, our approach would probably be today that we have to find out what drove that person. Because why were they unhappy where they were? I would say the same thing the other way around. If I saw a Christian that suddenly changed, I also want to know what's driving that person. So I think the key is not to be judgmental. That's for sure. We're not judgmental, and we don't personalize it. I would look at it more like figure out what's going on.
Gotcha.
And also, is my son or this person happy? Sometimes you find out that was an escape. They were in very big pain. Like I know many people who left religion because they were hurt by religion. They were abused or molested, and they don't say that. So I'm not suggesting everyone, but my point is you want to really understand the full story, because often there's other factors at work.
Thank you.
Great. Excellent questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was really nice meeting you. Beautiful. A group photo?
Yes.
Let's go. Where do we go?
Maybe we can stand behind the rabbi, I guess.
Oh,
Everybody take it by the books. We can take it by the books.
yeah, we can stand by the book.
This program is brought to you by the Meaningful Life Center. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at meaningfullife.com/donate.